and good evening to you guys. This is Insight News, where we explore expressing challenges and groundbreaking solutions shaping our country. And in today's episode, we delve into security, aging population, and technological revolution, and not forget our fight against malnutrition in the countries. So join us today in our news segment as we tackle this and we inform you on more ongoing issues in the country. This is Insight News. I'm your host for the most, Rozanne Nthambi, and let's get to the highlight of today's episodes. The power of struggle between multi-generals and the Fatah al-Burhan and the Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo.
The inefficiency that lies in the food value chain. And the more we started focusing on that, and we realized that there's actually an opportunity to create efficiency.
Poland, a lot of our agriculture and food production is it depends on rain. It's rain fed.
On to our first story of today, we focus on Africa's journey towards stability and development, often that is hindered by conflict. Today we focused on Sudan, a nation grappling in devastating that war that has escalated like since the power struggle between multi-generals and the Fatah al-Burhan and the Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo has displaced millions of Sudanese. Among the most affected are children and whose education has been severely damaged. Today we have our specialists today in our studios that we can have a one-on-one talk and see how we can address this conflict that is ongoing in the Sudan. And that's what we had for our first segment. We're going for a short commercial break, but we will be back for more impactful news. This is Insight News, and keep it locked. I'm your host, Rozanne Nthambi.
Kote nchini matumaini, tujitahidi, tujivunie, tuendelee. Twende mbele.
Kenya, twende mbele. NCBA, go for it.
Welcome from the short commercial break. On to other news, we'll go to focus on the big data and the transformative role of agriculture in our society. The big data is revolutionizing agriculture in Kenya, with companies like Twiga Foods connecting smallholders farmers to large markets. We spoke to Twiga Foods and we wanted to hear their transformative potential of data and explore digital divide between the urban and the rural farmers. Let's hear from our reporter on the ground and let's see what they have to say on the big data on agriculture.
Today we have Peter Njonjo, CEO of Twiga Foods. So welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So can you give me a little background of how you started Twiga Foods?
So we started Twiga Foods about 5 years ago, and with my co-founder, Grant Brook. So we met up in Nairobi and started talking about different types of businesses, and then we started gravitating towards the food business. But initially, we're thinking of ourselves as an export business. So I remember we went into the Middle East and got a few orders for the export of bananas. And then when we came back to Kenya, we realized that the pricing of bananas in Kenya is even higher than the pricing that we're being offered in the Middle East. So, but we didn't understand why. And as we started digging into that, we started realizing the inefficiency that lies in the food value chain. And the more we started focusing on that, then we realized that there's actually an opportunity to create efficiency and actually create a business out of it. So, and that's how we started distributing food in Nairobi, buying from farmers and trying to eliminate some of the waste that we have in the value chain.
So when you mean distributing food, how does it start? Do you just walk me out through how I'm a farmer, I'm growing crops, how do I get in contact with Twiga Foods?
What you find is that in markets like Kenya, a significant part of disposable income is going to food, 55%. In Nigeria, the number is 60%. Now, when you compare to markets like the UK, the number is 8%. Countries like South Africa, the number is 16%. So what it means is that we have poorer folks in these countries who are actually spending all their disposable income on food. And when you start going to the genesis of a problem and you realize that it arises from the fragmentation of a retail, because most of these countries actually don't have a large supermarket chains. If you think about Nigeria, 98% of the trade is through informal retail. In Kenya, the number is 90%. But if you go to countries like South Africa, that number is 40%. 60% is organized. So when you have an organized trade, farmers then have an addressable market. So they're able to invest in their farms and do whatever it is that they need to do to produce food efficiently at high quality and supply supermarkets. Now, when it's fragmented, the farmers don't have that access. So what happens is that essentially everybody who's farming is a subsistence farmer. They're growing produce on a small scale and very, very inefficient, high cost operation, and that translates into the cost of food. And then you build that actually 30 to 40% of the produce from smallholder farmers doesn't even make it to the trade because it gets wasted in the process through post-harvest losses. So what we did is that now we buy produce from farmers, we take it to our distribution center. So we have collection centers, we aggregate the produce, we take it to our distribution center, and from there we then distribute it to the informal retail. So by the informal retail, every day they order their produce through our m-commerce platform, and they're able to then at least let us know what it is that they need, and then we supply it the next day and collect the funds.
And do you have to register it, or how does that work?
Yes. So what happens is that right now, our m-commerce platform is what we call a mediated platform. So we've not made it self-service to the retail yet. So we have salespeople who go around and work with the retailers to collect the orders. So once the orders then come in, and this is based on areas that we've identified, because what we do is that we go into a neighborhood, we map the area, and we understand what is required in that particular part of Nairobi, and then we start developing a sales operation in that particular area. And then based on that information, then we use that to drive the procurement. And of course, over time, we've accumulated a lot of data. You know, on average, our customers order every 2 days. So we have a good idea of what it is that they need because it's all repeat orders. So it then allows us to have a very predictive procurement process on the back of that.
And do you deal with all crops?
Right now, we've kind of focused on a few. What we've realized is that less than 10 food items account for 80% of the food basket. So if you're looking at fresh, you're talking about bananas, potatoes, onions, tomatoes, watermelons. If you're talking about dry goods, it's essentially maize flour, wheat flour, sugar, cooking oil, and rice. So if you just focus on those goods, chances are that's 80% of what everyone consumes. And of course there's milk, but we don't do fresh milk, we just do long life because we don't have cold chain.
So we'll go back to the farmers. How does the farmer get involved?
We work with farmers in different parts of the country depending on the crops that actually do well in that part of the country. So what happens is that we have scouts. So the scouts go out into the farms because of course we have requirements we've projected for over a couple of months. So the scouts go to the farms and they register farmers, and then they book the harvest based on the maturity of the crop. So we have an idea of when it will be harvested, and all this is through a database management system, a data management system that we've developed. So then that starts giving us visibility of where we are going to source the produce from. So far we have about 15,000 farmers in our database. So and that kind of gives us an idea of where to harvest this tomorrow, where to harvest this the day after tomorrow. And then it allows us then to plan the logistics to the various farms in a way that is cost effective, so that you can know at least I'm going to this farm today, tomorrow we're going to this farm, the day after we're going to this farm, and it's all mapped out using tech. And for all these farms, we have GPS coordinates and maps of where those farms are. So we have done all that mapped out in terms of our planning database. And then we then know where exactly to go and also what price. Because what happens is that every day we're actually collecting price twice a day from the market, because at times in the fresh market, prices change, at times even hourly. So we collect pricing first thing in the morning and at midday. And that then allows us to build a database, which then allows us to understand how much we need to be sourcing the produce for, because at the same time, we also want to ensure the farmer gets a good deal.
I've also learned that the farmers get better price with you compared to the market.
Yes.
How does that work?
So, two things. First thing is we give farmers predictability, because what happens is that at times farmers price a product high because of uncertainty. So the deal that we give farmers is that we will buy all your produce and we will be dependable. And what happens is that for farmers, they're willing to give up what you call the uncertainty premium for the fact that they can sell everything that is on their farm. Because what happens is that they will then maybe harvest X number of tonnage from their farm. They know that maybe half will get wasted. So what they do is that they adjust the pricing to take care of the half. So what we sit down with them and say that, look, if we buy everything from you, how do we ensure that at least then you're able to make a decent amount of money, but at the same time, it builds competitiveness in the market. So our key objective is, as we start getting better prices from farmers, farmers are able to then make more money because they're able to sell everything. It's more predictable. They can then start planning better in terms of how they're running their farms as businesses. And on our side, we keep on bringing down the cost of food. So what you find is that in most instances, we're lower than the market. Our business model is anchored on three key pillars. The first one is around creating the lowest cost. So we need to go into the market with the lowest cost. So it means that we need to produce more efficiently. So we need to work with our farmers longer term. And we're transitioning to actually giving farmers contracts, helping them access financing, and actually allowing them to build scale on their farms. We're organizing for them to actually invest in irrigation infrastructure, boreholes, access to water, and essentially then, with inputs and all, and that allows them to actually produce more efficiently. For farmers that we've seen invest in this type of infrastructure, we've even seen a 5 to 6x yield differential between them and the ones who are actually not using this type of input. So by achieving that low cost for us is very, very critical, because then whatever benefits that we get, we then pass them on to the retail.
So does Tugwefo invest in any kind of extension service?
Yes. So what we do is that we provide the extension services to the contract farmers, and I think that for us is a way to also build capability. And also one of our biggest challenges that we're seeing these days is that a lot of young people have moved away from agriculture because it's not seen as the in thing anymore. And what we're trying to do is, and the main driver for that is the fact that, whenever people think about agriculture, they think about their grandmother at the back of a house growing some greens.
Things change a little bit though.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that what we're trying to do is actually to show that agriculture can actually be a career. You can be gainfully employed in the agricultural space. You can make a career that is as successful as any other career out there. So, and the more we start pushing that message, and the more then we start seeing enrollment. And right now we have lots of opportunities that we are creating with farm managers, which are jobs that were not seen as very lucrative in the past. And hopefully, as we create that whole ecosystem, not only do we provide the agronomy services, but we create a talent pool that is able to better manage the farmers.
You've named some of the challenges the farmers face. So what about trigger food? What are some of the challenges you faced along the way?
I think the key thing is around produce, just sufficient supply. And the reason why we struggle with sufficient supply is, there's a lot of climate change. Climate change is the change in the climate is actually affecting agriculture in a significant way. Just to give you an example, this year in Kenya, it didn't rain for most of the year, maybe until sometime in May. On the other hand, in Tanzania, we had a cyclone in the southern part of Africa, which then ensured that actually most of southern Tanzania was raining. So what happened is that come May and June, all the potatoes in Nairobi were coming from southern Tanzania while there was none in Kenya. So as you're trying now to plan your supply chain, how do you then start dealing with such circumstances? So the key thing is that now for us, our view is how do we empower our farmers locally to at least invest in irrigation, which then starts driving, removing the dependency on rain-fed agriculture. And I think that for us is a big problem that we're trying to solve. How do we get out of rain-fed agriculture dependency?
Malnutrition in Kenya. Malnutrition remains a pressing challenge in Kenya amid other regions in Africa. Sorry about that. We visited Turkana to meet families affected and to learn about the national policies that have been introduced in these regions to help in combating malnutrition in children and in women. In studio today, we have a BBC health analyst, and Soy, who will give us more input and more impact and to tell us about these national policies that have been implemented in such regions to combat malnutrition, and to also talk about how malnutrition affects women and children, because most of these women might be expectant. So join us in our conversation with Anne Soy, the BBC health analyst, to see what she has to say about malnutrition.
My name is Anne Soy. I'm a BBC journalist. My title is Senior Africa Correspondent and Deputy Editor. I report on all sorts of things, but previously I have been a health specialist, reporting on health first in Kenya and then across Africa. As my background is journalism. I did my first degree in journalism and my second in public health and epidemiology, and that was because I had become a health journalist and I needed something to support that. So basically that is me and my experience. I've been a journalist for nearly 20 years now.
Okay, thank you for gracing our interview today. Going straight to the point, we are going to ask you, what are the primary causes of malnutrition in Kenya, maybe in the arid and the semi-arid regions?
Well, when you talk about these two regions, obviously this is where we have very little rainfall, and a lot of our agriculture and food production is it depends on rain. It's rain-fed. And so when there's no rain, or where there's scant rain, then it translates to scanty food. The availability is a problem. So that is the biggest problem for the arid and semi-arid areas. But then that is even compounded when we have drought and recurrent drought. And I have been to northern Kenya, to the arid areas and semi-arid areas, when there has been drought, prolonged drought in some cases. And usually the devastation there is just large scale. There's large scale unavailability of food. They lose their livestock. So most of the people who live in these areas are pastoralists. So their wealth is in their livestock. But then when they lose almost all their livestock, that means they're impoverished. And therefore that also limits how much they can afford. So it's a multi-pronged issue. It's a big problem. And yes, malnutrition tends to soar during such times.
And what are the dire consequences? What are the consequences that leads to this malnutrition? One is drought. What maybe are some of the other?
Well, in terms of causes, yes, you mentioned those two, drought lack of water. But then there's also, what I have noticed as a journalist is also the general lack of information about proper nutrition. Many places you'll go to this country where people do not generally consume vegetables. They only consume vegetables as an accompaniment, and yet it is such a critical source of vitamins. So there's that general lack of information about what constitutes proper nutrition, what constitutes proper nutrition for children. And so the health promotion part has not been done effectively, if you asked me.
And
so there's the lack, there's the unavailability of enough food, but then there's also ignorance, which is a big problem. So even when there is food, like, believe it or not, some of the upmarket residential areas in Nairobi also suffer from malnutrition because they're not eating the right foods.
How effective, or if are there any maybe national programs like the Nutrition Action Plan, like addresses these cases of malnutrition maybe among children?
There are many publications that have been done, but sadly, a lot of these policies and publications are filed and kept on shelves. So it's the dissemination of that information that is problematic, in my view. And apart from that, because many of the problems we face in this country, you will find that the researchers have done their part, the policymakers have done their part, and then it is somewhere in a document tucked away somewhere in Nairobi. And when it comes to malnutrition, there have been national programs that have been put in place to try and address it. One of them is fortification of some of the basic food items that we consume. Our salt is fortified with iodine, which is an important mineral. A lot of the flour that we use is also fortified with vitamins, because the vast majority of people will consume maize flour, for instance. But you see, not everyone consumes maize flour from the shops. Some of them will buy maize and grind it and mill it in the local mills. So there are those national programs that have tried to address malnutrition. But if you ask me, it's the ignorance that needs to be addressed in the first place.
Okay. And how do maybe the global humanitarian organization maybe contribute a bit to the combating malnutrition in Kenya? Are there any programs maybe globally, maybe UN, maybe FAO, maybe who will be helping the malnutrition?
So when you talk about FAO, it's the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. They have a lot of, they work very closely with government, with the relevant ministries. But when you look at a country like Kenya in comparison with other countries in emergencies, their programs are limited in a country like this one because systems are working. The level of need is not at the same level as some countries, especially like during drought. Like you can't compare it to Somalia, for instance. You can't compare it to southeastern Ethiopia. You can't compare it to Tigray in northern Ethiopia, to Sudan at the moment. So their efforts are concentrated in the major crisis areas. So they support with information, they support with research, and they do support government, some of the government programs as well. So when there's food that is delivered, aid in terms of aid, so a lot of that food will try to be balanced to address the nutritional needs. And they also try to deliver, what I have seen generally, not just in Kenya, is that they try and deliver nutritional supplements, especially for children and pregnant women, because they're more vulnerable.
Apart from the nutrition maybe and the supplements, are there maybe other innovative solutions as we can practice maybe as Kenya, maybe to help maybe on the cases of malnutrition?
There has been an attempt to try. It's basically the state of complete mental, physical, psychological, social, emotional well-being. So you can never be 100%. That's why I say it is a constant target. And then once we have embraced that, we need to look at our culture, because the cultural perspectives of health or the cultural determinants of health play a bigger role in our overall outcome, in our overall well-being. So there are things we eat because we come from a certain society, and that is how they always consume food. We don't ask questions because that's how we've been cultured, right?
Yeah.
And then when you find this foreign information, it takes a while for it to sink in and for you to internalize it, to change your behavior and to embrace that health better. So that's why I say it needs to be sustained. It needs to be very deliberate. It needs to be intentional from the policymakers. And then after you have provided all that information, or rather side by side with that, they also need to make sure that there's better access to good food, to proper nutrition. So it's a whole of society approach, but a lot of it will come from the policymakers. They cannot rely on the media alone to disseminate that information.
And we see some other African countries going through the same. We saw like Egypt, and right now we're seeing like mangoes and most oranges are from there, and they were experiencing like drought, like more than 50% of its country it's drought. So what are some of the things maybe we can assimilate, or what are the things maybe we can urge our government or maybe NGOs maybe to come up with to help maybe combat maybe the drought, which is causing maybe malnutrition to those sides of the country?
Yeah, some of the desert countries are actually some of the biggest exporters of, some of the commodities that you have mentioned, food items, mostly the fruits and the like. But those are national policies that then cascade to, fortify their agricultural sector. They're not necessarily reflective on the consumption trends within those countries. This is about business. It's about looking at, foreign markets and growing the economy through agriculture, and being very deliberate about having the dams to be able to water to be able to irrigate large farms that can mass produce food enough for the local consumption as well as for export. Kenya can still do that as well, right? But when it comes to the nutrition of people, primary health is devolved. It's a devolved function. And that I see as a challenge, because every 5 years you have this disjointed way in which primary health care is being, the policies that guide it and how it is being practiced in the country. So I see that as a challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity where they can come together as governors, as the local governments, to harmonize those policies, to be able to make sure that, one, there's sufficient food, but two, the country is properly informed. The population is properly informed about proper nutrition. And then three, even just the research is done so that every year we know, and that research is done, it's just that it's not disseminated. We know how many children are malnourished, what are the causes of malnutrition. All that information is available. They cannot just depend on the media to go and look for the information and then disseminate it to the population. It needs to be a very proactive approach from government at whatever level. So yes, it can be done, and those desert countries that you have mentioned have shown that, it can be done.
Okay, on to maybe our last two, maybe couple of questions. We have seen we're in the 21st century and technology is moving fast, very, very fast. We're seeing like every day a new technology is made up, and it helps like in our day-to-day lives. Do you think maybe technology can maybe play a part maybe to combat this disease we are facing? And do you think maybe in the future technology maybe has a part to play, or maybe do you think it can maybe help in solving this problem?
I think technology is a very essential tool in the present day, because it means that you can reach more people faster. You can track a lot of these things. You can track the weights of children better than, rather than expecting them to go to health facilities. And not all the children do go periodically to health centers to have their weights checked, to have their their height and therefore their BMI determined. So yes, technology can make a difference, but at the same time, It's the quality of information that you disseminate through that technology. It's how you use the technology that really makes a difference.
Okay.
It is not just a question of having that technology.
Okay. And last but least, what do you think maybe the government can input? Because you see, they say they have invited FAO, or they have spent maybe 300 million, and we don't see where this money is going to. So what can we do maybe to urge the government, or maybe what can we maybe foster us as citizens maybe to combat this malnutrition?
I think we need to have very genuine conversations amongst ourselves. And I think, yes, the media has a role to play. But you see, part of the reason I actually went back to school to study public health is because as a health correspondent, I felt that I did not have the tools to be able to know what's, the quality of health information the population needs. Mm-hmm. I went to interview very distinguished researchers and, virologists, and you leave the interview thinking, what did that, what just happened? Because I was not understanding some of the things that they were saying. We were not in sync. Okay. And this made a big difference. So we need constant investment like that. And that is why I say it can't be left only to the media to determine, because we are not experts.
That was a really impactful talk from Ansoi. I hope you have learned a thing or two, and maybe we can all join hands to make it a better place. Thank you for joining us on Insight News 9 p.m. Tune in next week on Friday 9 p.m. to interview